He stuffed a towel into the car's exhaust pipe, ignited the engine and pressed the gas pedal, ready to end his failed life in this car. He is Scott, once the most promising football player in the small town, now destitute for 20 years. Seeing a former teammate visit, he showed no pleasure. The visitor had become a star player, with millions in salaries, sports cars, and women, one of whom was Scott's high school girlfriend. All this could have been Scott's if not for the accident that night. 20 years ago, the high school football championship was held in the town. With just 3.5 seconds left, Scott scored a touchdown, securing an unbelievable victory and the town's first championship. However, it cost him dearly. He was injured on the field, suffered a leg fracture, and said goodbye to football forever, missing the chance to change his fate through a sports scholarship. For 20 years he lived with regret and disappointment. Unable to become an athlete, he became a farmer, with a farm on the brink of closure, living in a cramped, dilapidated house. Despite the hardships, his only solace was his wife, who shared in his struggles, and their 2 lovely daughters. To provide a better life for his family, Scott took a gamble and planted a large field of rice while others planted corn. The risk was higher, but so were the potential rewards. However, the bank decided to recall the loan and auction off his collateral due to the slow harvest, unless Scott could repay a part of the money within a few days. With only 2 weeks left until the harvest, Scott felt powerless. When his wife asked if he had sorted out the loan, he instinctively reassured her, "Don't worry, it's all fine." Alone, Scott would repeatedly watch the recording of that fateful final, cursing himself for trying to be a hero when he had 2 unguarded teammates. As if troubles never come singly, an unexpected frost nearly destroyed the nearly ripe soybeans, pushing Scott to the brink. He had to harvest the soybeans within a day to mitigate some of the losses. Fortunately, he had good connections and borrowed the only working harvester in town. However, the machine got jammed by a piece of wood during harvesting. This was the last straw. Not only were the soybeans lost, but he also damaged his friend's harvester. Back in the car, looking at the Best Player award from that year and a life insurance policy, his pride overwhelmed him and he contemplated suicide, thinking it was the only way to avoid burdening his wife and daughters. The car filled with thick smoke, but then something miraculous happened. Just a minute before, he was contemplating suicide in the car, but then the thick smoke cleared. Not only was he alive, but upon exiting the car, he found that his leg, which had been lame for 20 years, had miraculously healed, and he had traveled back 20 years to his high school days. His once high school sweetheart, now a stunning beauty, came over and kissed Scott, making everything seem incredibly surreal. Entering the football team's locker room, he learned from the coach about the crucial game that ended his career, set to take place that weekend. Scott realized he had returned to his senior year at the peak of his high school days, with the chance to change his fate right before him. Back on the football field, despite 20 years without practice and some initial rustiness, he quickly adapted and regained his old form. His 18-year-old body was strong and full of energy. After practice, he wasn't yet satisfied and insisted on extra training with his teammates. Turning around, Scott saw a familiar figure, his future wife, Maze. Previously, after Scott's injury, they met and fell in love in the hospital, a love that lasted 20 years. Scott had always considered Maze the most important person in his life and would choose her again without the accident. However, there was a complication. At this time, Scott had a girlfriend with plans to leave the small town for the big city after graduation. They shared a common future and aspirations, a perfect match, but Scott couldn't help greeting Maze whenever he saw her. He wanted to change his destiny, play in the professional leagues in college, earn a lot of money, and have a bright future, which must include Maze. So Scott took every chance to get close to her, only to discover that his wife of 20 years, beneath her conservative exterior, had a wild side in her youth, such as enjoying skinny dipping in the pond. Skeptical, Scott and some classmates went to the pond late at night to stake it out.
God, they're coming off!
Scott couldn't stand watching for even a second and immediately drove over. He scared away 2 male classmates and, like an overbearing father, lectured and insisted on getting her out of the water.
You could catch a cold out
Hey,
here.
I got it.
Not to mention it's a school night.
After that night, they got to know each other better, and Scott learned that his wife truly loved this small town and never thought of leaving. However, he couldn't help but propose that they leave together, which she dismissed as a flirtatious tactic, and they parted on bad terms. Besides Maze, Scott also wanted to use this opportunity to help others, like his mother, whom he felt he owed the most. She had worked hard in the factory every day, raising him by herself. Scott desperately wanted to give her a better life. He asked his mother if she had the chance to start over, what would she do? Would she still choose to stay in this rundown town working a menial job? Would she still marry his father, who had passed away early? Without hesitation, his mother said she liked the small town, did not regret her current life, and would not want to change her choice of partner. Scott also wanted to save his high school coach, thinking that if he made a name for himself in the future, he could recommend the coach for a position at a big city university. However, to his surprise, the coach had received offers from universities every year but chose not to accept them. In a big university, sports coaches are a dime a dozen, but in this small town, he was the hope for these boys.
When I was your age, I really was just like you. Couldn't wait to leave this town. And when I finally did get out, saw what I saw and did what I did, well, I couldn't run back here fast enough.
It turned out Scott was the only one who wanted to escape the life of the small town. The final game was the next evening, and the university coach who wanted to recruit Scott warned him that the game would be tough and he might get injured. He said that even if Scott didn't play, the university had already decided to admit him. There was no need to prove anything. The opportunity to become a professional player was right in front of Scott, and it would be wise to skip the game. But before making that decision, he wanted to persuade Maze one last time, as in his previous life, the people he loved most were his wife and daughters.
What are you talking about? You have a girlfriend.
Yeah, but I don't marry her. I marry you.
Scott's revelation was too much for Maze to take in. She couldn't commit to a life with someone she had just met. For Maze, love was something that grew over time, not something that happened by accident. Ultimately, Scott couldn't convince Maze, who wanted to stay in the town, to leave with him. He went to his coach, admitting his fear of getting injured and wanting to sit out the game, only to be sternly reprimanded.
Do you know what the future is, Scott? The future is just a bunch of what you do right now strung together. And right now, all you're doing is giving up. And trust me, there's no future in that. Scott, I hope you don't give up this easy in life. Because it gets a hell of a lot harder than football.
A high school student might not understand this, but Scott, who had suffered for 20 years, felt it deeply. In the final moments, he decided to return to the field, face his formidable opponents, and confront his once-defeated fate. The game started, and Scott's team, the Black Bears, faced the Red Assaulters. Facing overwhelming odds, the Black Bears were losing ground until Scott single-handedly brought back some points. This situation was almost identical to what happened 20 years ago. But this time, Scott decided not to play the hero alone. In the second half, he asked the coach to change tactics, adding a receiver to spread out the opposing players and prevent them from focusing their attack on him. This change had an immediate effect, and Scott started passing the ball effectively, leading to perfect teamwork and narrowing the score gap. Finally, with just over 2 minutes left in the game, the Black Bears took the lead. The ending was beginning to change. As long as they maintained their momentum, Scott wouldn't need a last-second miracle to win the game, and his career wouldn't end there. But at a crucial moment, Scott got distracted by seeing Maze in the stands talking happily with another guy. The opponent seized the opportunity to tackle him, score, and tie the game. With only 3.5 seconds left and the Black Bears 4 points down, history seemed to be repeating itself. However, the coach's final strategy was different from before. He instructed Scott to pass the ball in the last moment. Scott realized the coach was giving him the choice of his future. He could see himself becoming a celebrated football star, but this future would mean losing his original family. In the second before the kickoff, Scott took one last look at Maze and changed his mind. In the final play, he repeated the same risky move from 20 years ago, but this time not to play the hero. In that split second, he understood that the most important thing in his life wasn't success, but Maze.
Touchdown, Coldwater! They will be the state champions of Ohio! Wow!
When the game ended, Scott returned to 20 years later, waking from a big dream. He hadn't succeeded in taking his own life, and his fate hadn't changed. Walking alone in the town, he found no one around until he reached his farm and discovered everyone had come to help harvest the crops. This meant Scott's farm was saved, and he embraced his wife once again among the crowd. Back in reality, Scott couldn't change his destiny, and perhaps the time travel was just a dream. Fate had come full circle, but after these experiences, Scott reevaluated his life and realized that despite seeming failures, he was far from having nothing. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this.